Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the second installment of Chay Lectures about Dramaturgy. Today I'm going to be presenting some short biographies on the playwrights, the stuff that I think concerns the text the most or that I just found particularly interesting. I won't be spending a whole lot of time on their writing styles or their other plays. That information will be found in my lecture exploring the text. So, without further ado, let's begin with the man, the myth, the mutton chop bearing legend, the father of modernism himself, Henrik Ibsen. In 1828, in the small Norwegian town of Skane, Henrik Ibsen was born. His family owned a small distillery here. Although his family started off quite well-to-do, as the industrialization of Norway took off, larger distilleries and factories took the place of the families, and they actually ended up very poor. As a young child, Ibsen was very intelligent, but he was also quite different from his siblings and peers. Ibsen preferred much quieter forms of play and didn't socialize very much. One of his favorite pastimes was creating dolls or figures out of paper and making up stories with them. He was also a very skilled artist with a natural talent for cartoons. Although we don't know much about Ibsen's early schooling, other than that it would have been public, at the age of 13 we do know that Ibsen attended a private theology school for a little over a year, but then he transferred back to the public education. At the age of 15, Ibsen moved away from home to the city of Grimstad. There he would be tutored in subjects like Latin, Greek, and chemistry. Ibsen wanted to go to school for medicine and began working as an apprentice for the local chemist or a pharmacist. So this was actually really common. It's quite shocking to hear that a 15-year-old moved away from home, but that was really quite normal. Most people were considered adults around 14 or 15, and Ibsen would not have been able to get private tutoring in Latin or Greek or chemistry or geometry at home. And those things were required to pass the university entrance exam, and Greek specifically was needed for the medical field that he wanted to go into. So moving away from home was the most natural, logical next step for him. Ibsen worked for and lived with the chemist and his family for quite a long time. The family kept to one part of their house and all of their domestic workers, their maids, and their cooks, and Ibsen lived in another part. So those domestic workers actually had a lot of contact with each other and kind of all stuck to one or two rooms. And at 20 years old, Ibsen had an affair with Elsa Sophie, one of the pharmacist's maids. That affair resulted in a son, but Elsa moved before the child was born. However, she did file a lawsuit and Ibsen had to pay child support until his son was 18 years old, which he did. Ibsen never met that son. Keep that in mind as you read A Doll's House Part 2. In 1849, at 21 years old, Ibsen wrote Catiline, his first play. He submitted it to be produced by the theater at the University of Christiana by the recommendation of a friend. In 1850, they finally got back to him, denying his request. The first play of Ibsen's that was actually produced was The Burial Mound, written under the pseudonym Brynwulf Bjarm. The use of a pseudonym is brought up as it concerns Nora in A Doll's House Part 2. Why might Ibsen have written under a pseudonym, and why did Nora write under a pseudonym? Just keep those things in mind. In the early 1850s, Ibsen and his friends created Mannen, the nation's first satirical magazine. It was sort of akin to The Onion that we have now. The magazine, however, did not have a very long life. It really only lasted about a year, but it was quite popular and definitely revolutionary. Ibsen did end up passing his university entrance exam, but he did not have enough knowledge of Greek, which prevented him from studying medicine. So Ibsen spent most of his days studying random stuff, writing poetry, not paying his rent, and doing other college things like creating Mannen. In 1851, Ibsen was very deep in debt and was looking at time in debtor's prison. Luckily for him, Ole Bull, a famous Norwegian violinist, wanted to start a theater company. Bull pulled Ibsen out of debt and hired him to work as the director for the company. If you hadn't picked up on this, Ibsen had no experience at all, whatsoever, nothing. So the company sent him on a tour of Scandinavia to learn about theater. how the companies were run, how the design fields worked, the styles of acting that were around, everything. I mean, the only company in Norway at the time was the university, and the whole thing was quite new, so not just to Ibsen. Nobody really knew what was going on, so there were a couple other people from the company with him. But he spent many months doing nothing but traveling Europe and watching plays, all at the expense of Ole Bull and this new theater company, and that is literally the dream, people. I wish. Anywho, on this trip, Ibsen began his career as a professional writer, but it wasn't very easygoing. During his travels, he wrote St. John's Night, which has basically the exact same plot as A Midsummer Night's Dream, which he saw while he was on this tour. And it didn't do very well. It closed after only 2 performances due to scathing reviews and lack of an audience. Then, in 1855, Lady Inger of Ostrat premiered. The play style required more realistic acting than what was popular at the time. He picked up on this during his travels, but the lack of training at his own company led to yet another unpopular production. So, that's pretty much what I have for Ibsen at this point. I would include more late life information here and things as they got closer to A Doll's House Part 2, but I just don't have it. The biography I have of him is well over 1,000 pages long, and it's the abridged version of 2 different volumes, and I'm hardly even a fifth of the way through it. I mean, it is insane how much information we have about Ibsen. And I've been working on this since the fall. So, part of the problem with dramaturgy is that you don't always get the time, or the resources, or whatever, to research everything you want, and you have to prioritize a lot. And so I really wanted to focus on his younger years because we know, like, the least about it. Like, people tend to know a little bit more about his later years when he's writing his most popular works, so I wanted to focus on him when he was younger. And then I spent most of my research time doing things as they connected to A Doll's House Part 2, so a lot of time on Nath, a lot of the themes in that play, and so Ibsen kind of got brushed off to the side. Now that I have a bunch of quarantine time, I'll get back to that, and I might send you guys updates as I get them. But that's really all I have for Ibsen, except I do want to add one point because I think it's absolutely wonderful. So I mentioned that Ibsen was very strange as a child and not like other people. Well, he didn't really lose that. He was always kind of weird, particularly when he was in college. He would wear these super ostentatious outfits, like the frilly poet shirts, and he would dress very fancy, and his hair was always, like, greased back, and he held a cane. He didn't know how to make conversation at all, and he couldn't dance, but he would dance with every girl he saw. Overall, the man was super awkward, and I love that fact about him because we tend to build this idea in our heads of what these famous playwrights were like, and we tend to hold them to a higher standard than they actually were. Like, we think of them as very regal and refined and oh so poised, but he was just like every other college student on the planet, you know? He didn't always go to class, and he didn't always pay his rent, and he made funny, satirical, Onion-like magazines. So, don't assume that these people are, you know, less real than everybody else on the planet. He was definitely a very real, very unique, interesting, awkward person. So, this will be discussed more in exploring the text, but I did want to note that Ibsen based Nora Helmer off of a real person, Laura Peterson Keeler. Keeler was an author, and Ibsen was her mentor. Keeler's husband became severely ill with tuberculosis and was prescribed a vacation to a warmer climate because that's what doctors thought would help. Laura took out a loan to pay for the vacation, forging the paperwork to do so. As a married woman, she was technically considered property and was not allowed to, you know, make loans or hold money or have a bank account. So this was super illegal for her to do. But she did it in the hopes of saving her husband's life. When her husband found out about the forgery, he had her committed to an asylum against her will. When Ibsen found out about this from her, he was very deeply, deeply disturbed, and it was really the inspiration that he used for writing A Doll's House, and she is the real-life Nora Helmer. So, moving on from Ibsen, let's talk about the modern phenomenon, the enigma, the award-winning Lucas Hnath. Lucas Hnath grew up in Orlando, Florida, just 5 minutes away from, you guessed it, Disney World. Hnath says that growing up, he was always fascinated by the artificial, theatrical world that he was drenched in as a child. Hnath's childhood home was a geodesic dome. Pictured on the right is one type of geodesic dome home. They can be clumped together, that can be just part of the house with branches coming off, or it can be just one orb. Fun fact, if you're ever down in the south or southwest part of the state of Wisconsin, you can actually see a couple of these. They were very popular in the 60s and 70s. I think they're quite ugly, but whatever. Anywho, it has been said that your childhood home is the dramaturgy of life. So that is what influences your choices and who you are, and a lot can be found out about you from your childhood home. So Hnath grew up in a home that doesn't really have many corners. Some things to think about as you read are, is it possible to be cornered in a room that doesn't have them? In the same manner, is it possible to be held back by something that isn't there? Another fun fact, one of our original design ideas for the show was to do it in arena, or with the audience on all sides, like in the round. That came from the use of the word forum and from inspiration from this dome. So if you want to see more about some of our design ideas, check out the aesthetics section of the Pinterest board that I've had Noah link for you. Hnath's mother was in the music and medical fields, and she wanted Hnath to pursue the same disciplines. He began college as a pre-med student, much the same way that Ibsen began college as a hopeful medical student. He had no plans to go into theater or writing because he actually didn't really like English in high school, and he thought he was terrible at it and much preferred math and science. Because Hnath is alive in the modern day, we do get to know just a little bit more about him personally. Hnath loves the films North by Northwest and Vertigo, and he likes to play video games and read nonfiction to relax. He has a particular fondness for the games Myst, Portal, and Portal 2, because of their exceptional writing, the same reasons that he likes those two films so much. Hnath also likes to listen to music while he writes. He's a big fan of the classical minimalists Philip Glass and Max Richter because they help him focus. For more popular music, he likes P.J. Harvey and Leonard Cohen, particularly the last 3 albums of Cohen's. Hnath also has a strange fear of crowds and open spaces when they're behind him. Hnath has been inspired by a lot of things in his life, just like every other artist on the planet. In high school, he read a lot of the works of Albee, Beckett, and other surrealists. These plays, with their unique structures, fantastical plots, and sometimes no plot at all, further kindled his love of the artificial, theatrical, and the facade. In college, Hnath ended up reading a lot of women and gender studies texts. His plays notably feature strong women making up at least half of the cast. His most recent play, Dana H., which just premiered in New York a couple of weeks ago, is a one-woman show about when his mother was held hostage by a psychiatric patient. So I've mentioned his mother a couple of times and not his father. Hnath is the child of divorce. Many of his plays feature a strained romantic relationship, looking specifically at Doll's House Part 2, which by nature has a strained romantic relationship. Who would his own childhood have affected his writing of Emmy? Hnath's plays are also known for moral ambiguity. It's never stated who is right and who is wrong, and everybody makes valid points. The first play that ever wowed him was A Christmas Carol for its use of an anti-hero, someone who is morally gray. So I want you to think about that as you're reading A Doll's House Part 2 as it relates to all of the characters. What about their arguments is morally right? What about them is morally wrong? Are they all floating in the gray? Is someone in the white? Is someone in the black? Think about moral ambiguity as you read. So that's really all I have for him. And you might be wondering why I have so little biographical information about him. Well, the fact of the matter is, he keeps a very, very private life. The information I have for him is the information that everybody has about him. from his bio in the scripts and his website and a couple of interviews that I found online. His birth date isn't even on the internet. The year of birth is listed as 2000, which is a total lie. He was born sometime in the 1980s, which I discovered when he said in an interview from 2017 that he was 37 years old. Sleuthing to the max, people. I myself have actually tried to contact him quite a number of times via his NYU information, since he sometimes teaches there, and I've emailed his agent, I've called his NYU number. He has not gotten back to me. Sadly, I have so many questions for him, but he does have a right to his privacy. So, that's really what I've got for this video, y'all. Thanks for watching, happy reading, and I hope you enjoy.